This is the first in a set of lectures on the role of government in a market economy. The role of government. As you know, there are three basic types of economic organization: tradition, command, and market. Now, the description of these systems are simply models, simplifications. Of course, there's never been any one economy exactly like another. There's so many variables, so much information that we couldn't possibly hope to describe all of the types of economic organizations. So we decided to just basically describe the categories. But these models of economic organization are too simplistic. They serve their purpose, but now it is time for us to sophisticate them, make them more real world like. And the complication comes in by virtue of the fact that all societies, all forms of economic organization have been some combination of all three of these, including this one. We call our economy a market economy or a capitalist economy, and that is because the vast preponderance of the solutions to the questions of what, how, and for whom are determined through markets. The vast majority, but not all. Some of these questions are answered through tradition, some are answered through command. Let's consider first how tradition plays a role in these decisions of a market economy. Consider, for example, the institution of racism. Why would a business limit its customer base by refusing to do business with some people? That doesn't make a whole lot of sense looking at it from an economic perspective. It must be due to tradition. Why would a capitalist society limit the ability of a large segment of its labor resources, i.e. women, to achieve their full potential? Look at here. There's a glass ceiling above this woman's head that's preventing her from getting to that top platform there, plateau. This guy has, free access, but she has a glass ceiling. Now, the term glass ceiling is an analogy that is often used to represent the institutions of sexism that prevent women from achieving their full potential. Now, why in the world would we limit half the labor force? Can't be due to economics. Must be due to tradition. So it would seem that a capitalist society would want to provide everyone with the greatest opportunity to fulfill their potential. This would maximize the productivity of the labor force, lead to new products, new services, greater efficiencies, more technological progress. Any limitations forced upon a group of people based on one attribute or another would limit this ability. But if they maximize their potential and they maximize their productivity, more goods and services would be produced with society's limited resources. Now, when the supply of goods and services go up, of course, as you know by now, by being an expert on supply and demand analysis, their price will go down. And when prices of goods and services go down, the purchasing power value of my income, my real income, goes up. And so by this reasoning, when you fulfill your potential, I am made better off. So I want you to fulfill your potential. But what is the source of the institutions that would prevent certain sectors of the population from fulfilling their potential. Tradition, obviously then, tradition is anathema to the efficiently functioning market economy. So why don't we get rid of them? Well, we could have laws against them, and there are many laws against racism and sexism, but I'm not sure how effective they are. And that's because traditions are very stubborn. They're difficult to eliminate. People tend to hold on to traditions for a wide variety of reasons. People trust and are comfortable with the familiar. Traditions are part of the religion or cultural heritage of some people and some groups. People are fearful and distrustful of the new, the unknown, alternative opinions and viewpoints. People are fearful of having to compete. People are fearful of being displaced from their position in society, their social status, or their privilege. So we have the forces of tradition and the forces of capitalism pulling against one another. Fortunately, however, capitalist systems are dynamic, malleable, and resilient. And because they are adaptable, we are making progress. Not quite as rapidly as some people would like, but we're moving in the right direction. And this movement, however, would be much less likely, even impossible, in tradition and command societies. But we're talking now about command. That's what the rest of this lecture is about. This is not a sociology class or an anthropology class. So we've got all this tradition stuff behind us. We know how tradition plays a role in a market system. Let's talk now about the role that government plays. This is the command aspect of our economy. What role does government play in answering the questions of what, how, and for whom? Now, you've seen this before. I'm pretty sure that, is our circular flow model. Of course, we had a little picture of a house here and a little picture of a firm with the smoke coming out of the smokestacks here. But we'll just put H there for household and F there for firm. Okay, now where does the government fit in? Let's put that G box up there. The G will stand for government. And now we're going to add government to our circular flow model. Now, let's start looking at the flows that connect the government to our laissez-faire capitalist model. Now, that first flow will flow from the household to the government, and that flow there will, of course, as you can see, represent taxes. The government collects taxes from the household. Now, the one we're most familiar with, of course, is income tax, but the government imposes many, many other types of tax, social security tax, okay? You may look on your pay stub, you'll see that some income tax is taken out. You'll also see something called a FICA tax. You say, what the heck is that? That's your contribution to the Social Security Fund. People who are old enough to get Social Security, thank you for it. Okay, but we'll all die off, and someday you'll be old as me, and you'll start getting Social Security as well. Hopefully the generations that come behind you can afford to pay for your Social Security. Also, you'll pay Medicare taxes, capital gains taxes in case you sell some asset at a profit. You'll need to pay capital gains taxes. Of course, there's not only income tax, there's outgo tax. We don't call it outgo tax, we call it a sales tax. There's property taxes, gasoline taxes, estate and gift taxes, license sin taxes. You know, if you sin, you got to pay taxes on it. Now, of course, this is taxing bad behavior like drinking and smoking. I don't smoke, but I do drink a lot of wine, so I pay a lot per year in sin taxes. Customs and duties and permits, all of the, and there are more. The list goes on and on. Most of you will wind up paying nearly half of your income per year in taxes in one form or another. Now, your income tax is only going to take maybe 20 or 15 or 20% of your income, but all of these other taxes are going to consume a lot more. Now, what does the government do with those taxes? You can see this flow from the government back to the household. It provides transfer payments and services. I didn't put transfer payments there, but transfers. But transfer payments are payments from the government to the household that are not in return for productive services, not in return for productive services. And examples of transfer payments are Social Security, unemployment, aid to financially dependent children, food stamps, welfare programs, etc. Those are transfer payments. What about services? The government provides services as well. I mean, the private sector provides most of them, but the government provides some services, such as national defense right here and garbage collection, and a whole bunch of services in between. The government provides those. Now, why does the government rather than the private sector provide those? We'll talk about that in a little while in our next lecture. But the government does provide some of these services that the household demands and consumes. Now, the firm pays taxes as well. You can see that flow flowing from the firm to the government. The firm pays taxes. Now, there's only one kind of firm that pays an income tax, and that is a corporation. A corporation is considered a legal person by the government. And like all other legal persons, has to pay an income tax. Now, the proprietorship and partnership, they pay taxes on their profits, but the taxes aren't paid by the company, they're paid by the owner as a form of income tax. So this is something you'll learn about in finance or accounting or something like that. I could go into it right now, but I don't want to use our scarce, precious time parsing this particular point. But firms pay taxes as well. Now, the flow from the government to the household, we can label that subsidies and purchases. Now, what is a subsidy? A subsidy is a financial incentive to act in some way. A financial incentive to act in some way. Now, why would the government have to provide a financial incentive? Doesn't the market provide enough financial incentives to make the firm act in some way? After all, the market provides a financial incentive for the firm to make widgets or Xerox or provide you with services or whatever it is. Why would the government have to provide the firm with financial incentives? Well, sometimes the government wants the firm to act in some way different than the market would indicate. Consider a farmer, Farmer Jones, we'll call him. He has 100 acres of land. And this land is a resource that he can use for generating an income. What would the farmer plant on that 100 acres of land? Well, he could plant corn, he could plant wheat, he could plant soybeans, or he could plant tobacco. Let's say that those are the four alternatives. I suppose there are many more. But which do you suppose that he will choose to plant? Well, he's going to look around and see what will provide him with the greatest income. And of course, he'll look for the price mechanism. He'll look at the signals that the price mechanism are sending. Let's suppose that the price mechanism sends him the following signals. You can make more money by planting tobacco than you can corn or wheat or soybeans. Well, what do you think that guy is going to do? He is going to pay attention to the self-enriching signals of the price mechanism, and he's going to respond accordingly. And so he's going to plant tobacco. So the government sees that he's planting tobacco, and they say, doggone it, this guy is going to plant tobacco. Doesn't he know that when people smoke that tobacco, they're going to have all of these self-inflicting health problems? They're going to, pollute the environment. They're going to make elevators stink all to hell. They're going to cause heart disease. They're going to cause emphysema. It's going to gum up the medical system with all of these self-inflicting problems. Let's get out there and try to dissuade him from planting tobacco. And so a government agent goes out to the farm, knocks on the door, says, yes, sir, I'm from the government. I see that you're planting tobacco. Won't you please change your mind? Because if you plant tobacco, people are going to smoke it. They're going to gum up the medical system, create pollution, yada, yada, yada. The guy says, well, look, yeah, I understand that. I understand what's going on, but I've got a family I've got to feed. I've got to put some kids through college. And the price mechanism indicates to me that this is what people want. I don't care what you want. This is what the market wants. So this is how I'm going to respond. And so the government agent says, won't you please? Well, all the begging in the world isn't going to get him anywhere. So he says, I'll tell you what to do. I'll tell you what we're going to do. We're going to make it so that we will pay you to grow corn rather than tobacco. We'll give you $2 a bushel for every bushel of corn that you grow. Now, as it turns out, this will make corn more profitable for the guy to grow. And so he'll say, okay, I'll do that. He'll do what's in his financial interest. So this $2 per bushel subsidy that the government is providing the firm, it's like the opposite of a tax, is going to motivate him to plant corn rather than tobacco. So that is the purpose of a subsidy. Now, purchases, what does the government purchase? Well, the government purchases darn near everything. You can't think of a thing that isn't purchased by the government. But basically, these services over here that the government provides, they're going to need equipment. For example, to fight the wars, the government's going to need ships and bombs and planes and helicopters and guns and bullets and stuff like that. Where do they get that stuff? Do they make it themselves? No. They purchase this stuff from the firm. To collect the garbage, they're going to need garbage trucks. Where do they get these? Do they make them themselves? No, they purchase them from firms. So here you can see we have hooked up the government sector to the rest of our circular flow model. Now, as we go along, we're going to continue to add sectors, 2 more sectors, as a matter of fact, the foreign sector and the financial sector, but we're not there yet. We're just going to focus on the government sector for right now, because we're interested in what role the government plays, what role command plays in our mixed economy. It's a predominantly market system, but it's also mixed with tradition and command. So let's ask, why government? Why do we need government to participate in our market system? If a laissez-faire market system works so well, as was indicated in the past readings and lecture notes, where it was described why government is so inefficient, we discussed that in the essay entitled Introduction to Capitalism. And chapter 5 in the textbook entitled Public Goods, Public Choice, and Government Failure also describes why why government is so inefficient. Why in the world would we want government intervening in the market economy. The market economy is efficient, government is inefficient. Why government? Well, as it turns out, there are two valid justifications for government intervening into the market economy. The first we'll call the positive justifications, and the other we will call the normative justifications. That's not negative justifications, that's normative justifications. Let's look at the positive justifications. The positive justifications deal with the issue of what is, whereas the normative justifications deal with the issue of what should be. What is rather than what should be. Now, the issue of what should be is a value judgment, and a value judgment has no place in science. You know, imagine a physicist dealing with the issue of the speed of light. That's 286,000 miles per second, the speed of light. He's not dealing with what should be, he's dealing with what is. What he thinks it should be is irrelevant. 286,000 miles per second, man, that's too fast. Somebody's going to get hurt. I think it should be slower. You can't imagine a physicist saying that. A physicist deals only with what is. There are no liberal physicists, no conservative physicists, because value judgments do not play a role in physics. They do play a role in the normative justifications of government intervention into a market system. So the value judgments have no place in science, and therefore, as economists, we will deal strictly with the positive justifications right after this. Let's spend just a little bit of time dealing with the normative justifications. Now, the positive justifications exist when the market fails to produce an efficient outcome. We want efficiency. When we get efficiency, we are making the best use of our resources, and that's what we desire. That's what's going to maximize our standard of living. That's what's going to make us richer and give us the greatest possible life in terms of material wealth. So we want economic efficiency, but sometimes the market just does not produce an efficient outcome. We will see later in the next lecture that there are some goods and services that the government cannot produce efficiently, and there are some goods and services that the government cannot produce at all, not one unit. We'll talk about what those are later. But now we're dealing with the normative justifications. The normative justifications exist when the market produces an efficient but undesirable outcome. Undesirable. Now that's where the value judgment is. When the market produces an efficient outcome but an undesirable outcome. Now, what is so undesirable about an efficient outcome? How can an efficient outcome be undesirable? I thought efficiency is what we wanted. How can an efficient outcome be undesirable? When it produces too much poverty. Now, how much poverty is too much poverty? That's where the value judgment comes from. Now, let's first talk about why does an efficient outcome produce any poverty at all? Well, recall the concept of distributive efficiency. This was described in the essay entitled Market Efficiencies. And we talked about allocative efficiency, that is the right resource going to the right industry in the right quantities. We talked about productive efficiency, and that is firms using the most efficient means possible, making the absolute best use of society's scarce resources in producing goods and services. And we also talked about distributive efficiency. Now recall my point when I was in the essay on distributive efficiency, I did not say that the distributive efficiency produced the best distribution. I said it produces the most efficient distribution. By that, I mean that the method of distribution in a market system is that which motivates an individual to make the greatest productive contribution. This is what motivates an individual to make the greatest productive contribution to society. The way in which income is distributed in a market system. It motivates you to make the greatest possible productive contribution to a market system. And that is because your income is going to be equal to the value of your productive contribution to society. So if you want a high income, and we all do, the way to get that is to make the greatest productive contribution to society that you possibly can. Now, most of us have to do it with our labor. Others, they have so much capital, so much land, so much property resources that they can make a huge productive contribution to society without, having to go to work every day. You take Elon Musk or Jeff Bezos. They have property resources that generate so much income for them that they don't have to go and wake up at 6 o'clock in the morning and hit the beltway every morning. Their property resources make the productive, which they own, by the way, which is what private property is all about, make the productive contribution for them. They don't have to sweat and grunt like the rest of us. But nevertheless, they are motivated to make the greatest productive contribution possible, whether through their labor or some other way, because this is what's going to get them the greatest income. But what if some people they can't make a productive contribution to society? Why wouldn't they be able to make a productive contribution to society? Maybe they're old, like me. Maybe they're untalented, like me, unintelligent. Maybe they're too young to make a productive contribution to society. Or maybe they're physically or mentally disabled. In a market system, the people who can't make a productive contribution to society get no income. Now, if somebody doesn't make a productive contribution because they choose not to make a productive contribution, as long as they are aware of the consequences of them not making a productive contribution, I say fine. They can, do whatever they want. This is a free country. But what if it's not their choice? Too old, too young, mentally or physically disabled? Do we let these people starve? Society votes no. Now notice that term, I say votes. Because the society decides this issue through the democratic process. Too much poverty is beyond our social norms. That's where the term normative comes from, beyond our social norms. So what do? Well, in order to avoid too much poverty, because like I said, people who can't make a productive contribution to society get no income at all. In order to avoid too much poverty, society agrees through our political system, they make the decision through the political system to take wealth away from those who have earned it and give it to those who have not. This is the way they redistribute income through the tax system. But now society has to decide how much poverty is too much poverty. Would we want zero poverty? Would we want total income equality? Now here, let me make the distinction between absolute and relative poverty. Absolute poverty refers to the amount of goods and services you're able to consume. Relative poverty means where you stand compared to others in terms of income. Would we want total income equality? That would eliminate relative poverty. If we could guarantee that everybody in the society received an equal income, what would be the consequence of that? There would be no incentive to work. Would we want total income equality? The answer is no, for obvious reasons. We don't want total income equality because there would be no incentive to work. If I was guaranteed an income that was equal to yours, would I roll out of bed at dark 30 in the morning? I'd still be in bed. Why? Because I'm going to get the same income you do. And I'm not going to work hard. I'm not going to try to get ahead because that's not going to pay off for me. I'm not going to work overtime. I'm not going to even become educated. All of that work, why? I'm not going to get ahead. I'm still going to get the same income you get. If everyone were guaranteed an equal income, the country would no longer be a meritocracy. And a meritocracy is you reap the rewards of your productive efforts. If people do not reap the rewards of their productive efforts, they lose an incentive to make those productive efforts. Why are you spending your time, your energy, your money to come to college? Why are you listening to this lecture? Why are you putting yourself through this torture? Because you expect to eventually receive greater rewards. You'll eventually get your college degree, you get a high-paying, cushy job, your standard of living will go up. That's what motivates you to become educated. You're becoming educated so that you can make a more productive contribution to society. Why do you want to make a more productive contribution to society? Because you're such a good guy? Heck no. You want to make a more productive contribution to society so that your standard of living will increase. But if your standard of living was going to be fixed and equal to everybody else's, you would not have an incentive to make a productive contribution to society. So your greater rewards would be in the form of higher income, but if there are no rewards to be gained, you probably wouldn't come to college. You'd be wasting your time. So we can conclude that diminishing rewards to productive behavior reduces the incentive to make a productive contribution to society. Diminishing the rewards to productive behavior reduces your incentive to make a productive contribution to society. But not only do taxes diminish the motivation to make a productive contribution to society, they also affect the allocation of resources. So when we tax those who earn wealth, who earn an income, we diminish their motivation to make a productive contribution to society, but we also misallocate resources. Let me describe to you how taxes might result in a misallocation of resources. Okay, and we know that when resources are allocated, economic efficiency is diminished. Okay, so not only does taxes reduce the motivation, but it also misallocates resources. How does taxation affect the allocation of resources? Consider this. Suppose that Prince George's Community College will pay me $150 to teach a 3-hour class. That's me standing on the desk there in one of my classes. That's not me, it's Robin Williams and the Dead Poets Society, but anyway, it kind of looks a little bit like me when I had dark hair. Now, also, suppose that a kid in my neighborhood would mow my lawn for $100. Okay, now keep those two factors in mind. And here's what happens. Oh, by the way, let me also mention that it takes me 3 hours to mow my own lawn because I'm old, I'm slow, and I'm unproductive. I'm not bald-headed, but I do have gray hair, and I'm an old man like that. It looks a little bit like me. Okay, so here's what happens. One Saturday morning, just as I was about to go out and mow my lawn, my department chair calls me up and says, "Hey, Bill, we have an emergency here. Professor so-and-so can't teach their class. Can you come in and teach their 3-hour class?" And I'm thinking, well, if I teach this 3-hour class, they'll pay me $150. But if I go out and mow my lawn, I can create $100 worth of material wealth for myself. I say $100 because that's what it would have cost me to hire the kid. So instead of paying him, I get to keep the $100. So I'm offered the opportunity with the next 3 hours to teach a class for $150 or mow my lawn for $100. Now, which would I do? Well, I'd much rather teach the class and mow the lawn. I don't care how much I was paid. I hate mowing the lawn, but let us assume that problem away. Okay. So by teaching the class, I would be creating $150 worth of material wealth for myself. However, I'd have to mow the lawn, get the lawn mowed. So I would hire the kid, and he would be creating $100 worth of material wealth for himself. What is the total amount of wealth created? $250. I'd be creating 150. He'd be creating 100. Now, my self-interest would motivate me to make that choice. And as you can see, by me working, teaching the class, and hiring the kid to mow my lawn, there would be this GDP in this two-person society of ours. And it's my self-interest that would motivate me to make that decision to do that, because I would get a net gain of 50. And I could also avoid mowing the lawn. I could be paid 150 rather than creating $100 worth of wealth for myself. And as you can see, with this allocation of resources, the greatest amount of material wealth is produced, 250. Okay, but now suppose that the government said was going to tax me 50% of my income. What would I do? Well, I'd mow my own lawn. Why? Because the net benefits of teaching would be $150 less half of that, which would be $75. So the net benefits of teaching would be $75. The net benefits of mowing my lawn would be $100. Now, the government can't tax me on the amount of wealth that I did not pay out, that $100, and I was able to keep it for myself. They haven't figured out a way to do that yet, but they're working on it. The net benefits of me mowing my own lawn would be $100. The net benefits of teaching would be $75. So what would I do? I'd mow my own lawn. And the total amount of wealth that was created then falls from $250, which would have been the case had I taught the class and hired the kid to mow my lawn, to $100. I don't teach the class. A bunch of students sitting there don't get educated. I'm mowing my own lawn. Now, that's definitely not where my specialty lies. I'm performing a task at which I am unproductive, and the kid is unemployed. He's sitting there playing video games. Now, what kind of a allocation of society's scarce resources is that? I'll tell you, it's a bad one. And why would that result? Because of taxes. So, as you can see then, trying to make the economy more equitable makes it less efficient. That's known as the equity efficiency trade-off in economics. Trying to make the economy more equitable, that is, equal incomes, results in less efficiency. Why? Because when you tax, you're going to result in a misallocation of resources, which reduces the amount of output in the economy. And when you redistribute income, you are taking wealth away from those who produce it and giving it to those who do not. Now, there's an inconvenient little expression in economics, and that is, if you tax something, you get less of it. If you subsidize something, you get more of it. When you tax productive behavior, you're going to get less of it. When you subsidize unproductive behavior, you're going to get more of it. So when productive behavior goes down, unproductive behavior goes up, the economy becomes less efficient. But we do want to redistribute some income because we don't want zero economic income redistribution. Let's look at this continuum here. That little line will represent a continuum. And on the left side there, we see total income equity. That's where everybody makes the same amount of income. Over here is perfect economic efficiency. That's where there is no redistribution of income at all. Now, we don't want to be here because even though our incomes would be equal, we would all be equally poor. Why? Because nothing would get produced, or darn near close to nothing would get produced. We'd all have equal incomes, but we would all be equally poor. Over here, we would be making the best use of our resources, but there would be too much poverty because some people can't make a productive contribution to society. So where do we want to be? As you can see, perfect economic efficiency is not desirable because of too much poverty. Total income equity is not desirable because of too much inefficiency. Society's scarce resources are laying around watching the clouds, contemplating their navel rather than going to work. Now, as we move from perfect economic efficiency towards economic income equity, our standard of living goes down because the economy becomes less efficient. As we move from here, we don't want to be here. We want to move towards here, but as we move more towards here, our standard of living is going to go down as the economy becomes less efficient. How far do we want to move? Where are we as a society on this continuum right here, on this spectrum? Depends upon the voters. Where does society want to be? If you look at the bills that are passed by Congress, almost all of them, not 100% of them, but almost all of them deal with this issue in some way. How much income do we want to redistribute? Now, the left, the political left, as you can see, wants more income equity. The political right wants more economic efficiency. Somebody who tends towards this side of the spectrum, we call a conservative. They tend to prefer economic efficiency to income equality. Over here on the left side of the spectrum, these are the liberals. They're willing to sacrifice economic efficiency in order to achieve more income equality. Now, those are on the extreme right of the spectrum here, want almost no income redistribution. They are the libertarians. They want absolute minimum government interference in the economy. Now, don't get liberal and libertarian mixed up. Libertarian, the root word there you can see is liberty. They want minimal amount of government intervention. The liberal wants more. Now, on the extreme left of the spectrum, you get the socialists. They want more and more and more income equity and are willing to sacrifice economic efficiency, although virtually all of them will deny the fact that economic efficiency is being sacrificed. Over here on this side of the spectrum, these guys right over here tend to be the Democrats. Over here on the right side of the spectrum, they tend to be Republicans. Where are you in this issue? The liberals' argument is that this is a rich country, and therefore we should not have to suffer the problems of poverty. Now, this is maybe true, but the problem with this argument is that the wealth that exists does not belong to the country. It is not the country's wealth, it is the individual's wealth who created it. The conservatives' argument is that a rising tide lifts all boats. That is, perfect economic efficiency means that the economy is going to grow, and so is the standard of living, and people who we would consider poor live at a much higher standard of living than, average income in most countries. That's the way it is in the United States. The people who in the United States who live below our poverty line are middle class and above in foreign countries. I don't think I said that very well. Let me try to repeat that. A family of four living below the poverty line in the United States is living at a level that would be considered middle class, possibly even above, in most foreign countries, particularly non-capitalist countries. But the problem with the issue that a rising tide lifts all boats is that the rising tide doesn't lift all boats. Some people are still left behind. So that ends our lecture on the normative justifications for government intervention into the economy. Where we're going with our next lecture is on the positive justifications. The positive justifications deal with what is, not what should be. There are no value judgments here. The positive justifications of government, they exist when the capitalist economy fails to produce an efficient outcome. So we'll see you in the next lecture, and in the meantime, we will see you on the discussion board. If you have questions or comments, please post them on the discussion board.